Hi, this is Bob Grant from Relationship Headquarters. I'm a dating coach and author of The Woman Men Adore. And today I have a special guest, Ms. Violet Lange, and she is a love and dating coach, and she's so much more. So, Violet, I am glad for you to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Bob. I'm really excited about our conversation.
I know originally in one place, your husband and they had suggested, and he works with men, and he said, "Hey, I appreciate it, but I work with men, but my wife is really good with working with women." So that I went to your website and looked it up, and I thought, "Oh, this is really good. I should have her on." So here we are. And why don't you tell us a little bit about who you work with or who you serve and some of your areas, then maybe we can kind of dive into some details.
Perfect. I would love to. So, I mainly work with women who have achieved a lot of success in their life, but have not figured out how to create a loving, lasting relationship. And they might be overthinking, or they might have past trauma, sexual or otherwise. They might not feel really comfortable being vulnerable or being in their body, connected to their sensations, connected to their feminine energy. And it feels like, they've done so much work, but they can't quite get what they want. So I love to help them integrate all the pieces and help them integrate their head, their heart, and their body and date in a way that isn't just strategic. We see tons of Instagram clips on like the 5 things to text a guy to get him back or whatever. And, that's nice in the short term, but I want people to feel confident about who they are, what they offer, and the love that they want to create, and not have it just be a strategy, but to be something that feels authentic to who they are.
And I like how you mentioned the integration of all those parts as opposed to just one, especially with the strategy part of let's just go 100% on strategy and not have anything else to go along with it. So what has it been like for you when you talk with women? And I think you just said as far as the emotions, I don't know if you said within their body. When you said that, I'm thinking of a couple of clients that were massage therapists, and they had told me that how important it was to do a history with someone, especially women, before they did a massage. And I said, why? And they said, because if they have past traumas, so you're nodding your head, so you know this. I didn't know this. That they massaged the wrong place and the woman just came unglued. And they're like, what? And apparently that was the body had stored whatever trauma in that spot. And, they both looked at me like it was so obvious. It was obvious once they told me that. So I wasn't familiar with that until I'd heard that, but apparently this is what you're very familiar with. So can you tell us a little bit about why those things are so important, the integration, especially with your emotions in your body?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I spent the first 30 years of my life completely disconnected from my body and my emotions because I did have a lot of childhood sexual trauma. And it wasn't until I kind of made peace with that and started paying attention to my body. Because what happens is, whether you had a car accident or whether you had sexual trauma or, a really bad breakup, we like store the tension in our body, and we for some people it might be in their shoulders. They hunch their shoulders because they're afraid of something happening. For other people, it's tension in their hips, and they don't feel like they can go with the flow or be flexible or fluid, and they get kind of locked up there. So it depends on the person in terms of where they store their trauma, but because it's oftentimes uncomfortable to like pay attention to what's going on in our body, if we're not feeling good in our body, we will numb it out and we'll just hyperanalyze his text or, try to perfect our dating profile. And those are all important things. We want to be good communicators and thoughtful communicators, and we want to have a profile that, speaks to who we are and that's magnetizing. But we can't just stay on the surface, I found, if we want to create a conscious or lasting relationship. So that looks like just bringing a lot of awareness. Okay, my heart is feeling heavy. Okay, well, what's behind that? Oh, I'm feeling grief. Why am I feeling grief? I'm feeling grief because I thought I would be in a relationship by now, and I'm not, and I'm feeling like a failure. And what's behind that? I feel like I'm repeating the same pattern my mom did. Once they got divorced, then she never found another partner. Like, this is just an example. It's not my own story, but um, if we just say like, oh, I don't like, I don't like his, I don't like his profile because of XYZ. We're like blaming someone else versus I feel tight in my heart when I look at all these profiles because I feel overwhelmed because of, those examples I gave. So when we actually are willing to go deeper into our feelings and our sensations, a lot is revealed that we can work with. If we're just saying, well, there's no good men out there, or I don't like his profile, then we're just deflecting, and there's not really any empowerment or sense of possible change.
So when you're saying that, especially about the profiles, or I don't like it just because of whatever superficial, or the others, I've got this tightness. I think what I'm hearing from you is the idea of utilizing them both together as opposed to one extreme or the other.
Yeah.
And I mean, sometimes it may be that there's just something awful about him. He's just not your type, you know.
Yeah.
And it may, but sometimes there's a gut feeling, but that we may not know what that is unless we really listen to it. I think that's what I'm picking up on is how critical it is and probably vulnerable to actually be able to listen and sit with that emotion, especially if it's an uncomfortable one.
Absolutely. And then that translates into how we show up when we're dating because sometimes, someone will say something that doesn't feel good to us, or he'll show up 20 minutes late for the date, but we're supposed to be the good girl and we don't want to say anything, and he might be the one. So, we just withhold so much versus saying, oh, I'm feeling kind of bummed. I was really looking forward to this date. And, you showed up late and it just makes me feel a little bit shut down or like a little bit curious about if I can trust you or not. Like it's very different than being like, oh, hi, and pretending nothing happened, but then being resentful or critical of that person for the rest of the date. So once we can get in touch with our body and our emotions and our feminine energy, which we can talk more about, then it kind of paves the way for us to be more authentic when we're dating. And what I've found is we have certain patterns of attraction. So I don't know if you found this with your clients, but I find that we as humans tend to attract the same sort of person over and over again, even if they look different, like they have the same personality or same attachment style or something. Um, but if we become more integrated, then we're going to attract someone who's also more integrated. So what I've seen is there's less ghosting, less flakiness, less saying one thing but doing another, less he just wants to be with me for sex. Like all of that changes because we're dating in a more authentic and grounded and transparent way. Like you said, it is vulnerable.
It sounds like that authenticity, it's going to be difficult. Sorry, without that authenticity, it's going to be difficult to find someone that's a good match for us because we're presenting the person we want them to see or think that we should be, which means we end up with someone that may or may not be a good fit for who I really am.
Yes, exactly.
When you're saying that, I had a memory of years ago. I was dating someone very seriously and we went to counseling and it didn't work out. And I remember coming back in to the therapist and he said, "Why are you here?" I mean, he knew, I guess he was just doing it to be rhetorical. I said, "Because I know if I don't come back in here, I'm going to bring someone else in here in 6 months. It's going to be the same person with a different face." I just,
Exactly.
and I remember that pattern of just, I think the goal is where someone doesn't have to do that enough times. I mean, I think it was like I'd been in enough times to realize I wasn't going to logically just choose better because I thought that person was different than the one I'd been before, but the same issues or the same things that would push the same buttons in me because those buttons weren't addressed, those injuries weren't addressed. And when you talk about this with women, tell me what your experience is that, and this may just be me as a man saying this. I wonder if it sounds like, hey, you need to do all this work. It's on you. You need to do all this work to make sure you're just the bestest, most awesomest person. And then if you do it great enough, then you get the prize of being a relationship. I don't think they would say it that way, but do you get that or do you get a different reaction when you start pointing toward, especially women, toward their heart and working on their heart and addressing those issues?
Sometimes people feel like I'm not enough or I have to do it perfectly to get what I want. But I usually tell them there's plenty of people in a relationship that have not done it right, that have are on their third marriage or that have messed things up, and so it's not about being perfect. There's definitely this element of perfectionism that comes through, I think, in humans and in women in certain ways about how they look or being polite or saying it just right. Um, I find that when we're working more with our heart, what comes up is fear, grief, shame. Like shame that I don't have a better relationship, or that I've been single for so long, or that my last partner cheated on me, whatever the thing is that has happened. Or fear, like, well, what if I reveal who I am and no one wants it? What if I show up authentically and I'm still single? Like, then it'll be worse than just pretending and then not having to feel all these things that I haven't felt in so long. And then the grief, the grief is complex. Grief can be from loss of partners. Grief can be from um, not having what we want. And then when we go deeper from the heart to the body is where a lot of times anger is stored,
Hmm.
like anger that we didn't get to express in previous instances.
Mhm. As you're saying this, I hear how authentic that sounds, that someone would share those kind of fears and actually verbalize them out loud. And I know as a man that that's actually more appealing hearing that versus not having a problem or always being positive or because at least for me, but most men I talk with is you can't feel it. At least the things you were talking about sounded sad. And I'm not saying you were sad, but you looked like it. The authentic part is like, oh, I can relate to that. It resonates versus having an image that's perky and smiling, even when talking about painful things. That I think that's hard for men to relate to, and we don't necessarily know what to do with it.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think we feel it and then we reveal it and then we heal it.
Ooh, I
So if
like that.
we're willing to
I
feel
know it
it,
rhymes, but I like that.
yeah,
No, that's a good one.
yeah. So
Okay.
if we're not willing to feel it, then he can't feel us. You know, it's like if you want to find your man, but he can't feel you, he can't find you. And then you have to be willing to reveal those feelings. And through that process of having someone hold space for your feelings and your revealings of them, that's where healing comes is, oh, a man held space for me feeling frustrated with him. I did it in a kind way. And he didn't leave. Like, oh, okay, I guess my anger doesn't make me a bad person. You know, like we just slowly start to heal the parts of ourselves that we've shut down because we were considered too much when we were children.
Mm-hmm. And so now I've heard someone say that a relationship is designed to heal childhood injuries, which I could never write a book on that because no one would buy it, I don't think. But I think there's a lot of truth to that. What you're saying is that because in that experience of, oh, I can get angry, I love that picture, is, oh, I got angry and they didn't leave. And then maybe that's the first time.
Yes.
And that, oh, now anger doesn't mean someone leaves. That association doesn't have to stay in place.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the thing you mentioned as far as with your body, is I wonder how much when it's sometimes logic, which sounds great, I find it to be a bit slow as far as being able to figure out what's going on. But I wonder if in your emotions or your body, we get signals that are quicker that let us know something before consciously we're aware of it.
Definitely. I mean, we were talking earlier about being aware of your body sensations and checking yourself if you have ways that you deflect or blame or kind of find fault in the other person early in the process or when you're already in a relationship. But we don't want to not pay attention to our instinct or our intuition about things. Sometimes we'll have an intuition and we want to honor that, but sometimes we'll have a judgment or a fear. And it can be hard to discern which is which until we start to get to know our body more. Like for some people, when it's just a judgment, things feel very fast and they feel kind of like tight in their head and they feel kind of like puffy in their shoulders. And when it's more of an intuition, it's like, something doesn't feel right about this. I need to slow down. It's less like, big action oriented and it's more like, let's pay attention to this. And maybe this reminds me of someone, or maybe I call it catnip. I don't have cats, but I've heard that, cats go crazy for catnip. And so I say we have this dating catnip, which is the pattern we keep repeating that's not healthy for us. So for me, I was attracted to guys who are really creative and kind of like tortured artists and a little bit lost in their lives and very aloof, very avoidant attachment style. But it wasn't until I started owning some of those things, like my own anxiety and how my anxious attachment was playing into their avoidant, but also how I was looking for someone creative because I wasn't owning the part of me that wanted to be creative. So once I became a little more creative in my life, taking pottery classes and painting, even though they looked like not that great, then
Mm-hmm.
I didn't need to like find that in a partner.
Oh,
And I
interesting.
also didn't need to be like chasing their approval. And that was my catnip. Is like,
Yeah.
ooh, he's so caught up in his art, but if I can just distract him a little bit, maybe he'll pick me. Um, so when I was dating, oftentimes I'd find myself drawn into a profile of someone who is this, tortured artist. And my intuition would be like, oh, wait, this is maybe my same pattern. And I would have to slow down and kind of get to know the person too. Sometimes it's an instinct or an intuition and you just completely say, no, this is not for me. Sometimes you're like, okay, this might be my own pattern. What questions do I need to ask? What do I need to pay attention to? How do I not test, but how do I vet this person to see if if it is indeed my old pattern, or if there's something I can learn from this, or a way I can heal through this.
And when you're saying that, especially about the awareness between, whether it's being judgmental or, I wonder if that's something that someone ends up discovering about themselves. Like if I know myself, okay, I see you nodding. Tell me, please.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. You're spot on. Like once we know ourselves more, then we can figure out what bodily sensations are more of our fear or our, judgment versus what's our intuition or our instinct. And everyone's wired a little bit differently. I mean, the strange thing is like as you look to find a partner, it's really about becoming more intimate with yourself. And then as you do that, then you can invite someone else into your life and your world and vice versa and have more depth of connection.
So it sounds like if we're not intimate with ourselves and not aware of, and just as a qualifier, because sometimes I'll hear women, I mean, men too, but I speak more with women, that the standard is so high that I'm going back to that, I must be so in tune and so in touch, which it's not that as much as just sort of knowing who you are. Because I don't like the way you described it, which is I know myself, I know the things where I've been through, I know the trauma I've been through, and I face that, and it's however you want to frame it, it's had an impact on me, but it's all the things that kind of formed me and my tendencies and who I am. That kind of awareness to me sounds different than I've got to be aware of it and to get rid of it, take this giant eraser where it doesn't sting anymore. Because actually, the way you're talking, it sounds almost as though this, if we allow it, the scars we have are opportunities for empathy and for growth. I mean, I wouldn't wish them on people, but they present an opportunity, but that willingness to listen and pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really feeling your heart in that share and your compassion for the women you work with and just for humanity as we go through these things and our tendency to want to clean everything up. And I like what you said. It's like, yeah, our scars are opportunities for growth um, and I don't want to say humility, but there's something with surrender, like with feminine energy, like being able to surrender and soften. And if we're like, we got to cut this out and be perfect, like there's not a lot of softness in there. And in my experience with my own life and my clients, the softness and the surrender and being with our feelings, like that's way more attractive than this like curated look that we need to make. And sometimes it's what we've gone through that also makes us more attractive. Not because we're feeling like we're victims or that you have to be the damsel in distress, but it's okay to need a man. It's okay to miss a man and to want him in your life. It's okay to say, like, I've been through these things, I know who I am, and because of that, I know I need a partner who I feel emotionally safe with. Or I know I need a partner who is willing to just drop in with me and listen. And it can help us better communicate like what we need and want and be vulnerable in ways that the other person wants to not help us but wants to support us. And I'm not talking about like traditional pay for all the bills and that sort of stuff. I'm talking more about like emotional and spiritual support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that we get to share our life with someone, not just in a physical sense, but
Mm-hmm.
emotionally and intellectually and all of those.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. So when you're working with someone, you're talking and sharing, have you found, this is kind of broad, I realize, that there are either tendencies or trends that folks tend to fall into? I'll give you an example for me. Is that I've seen more, okay, men do this too, qualifier, but I've seen some women is that they'll say something painful and they'll laugh. And if it's first 5 minutes talking to them, I don't point it out. But if I know them, I'll say, well, what's so funny? It's not to judge. It's just to let them know it's a disconnect kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And, usually it's I'm doing this because I don't want to be painful. And I've had some say, if I don't laugh, I'll cry.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. That's so that's one I always look for with folks. But have you seen things that folks can either be on the lookout or that, and maybe it's not common, maybe it's unique, but I'm just wondering your experience on that. far as sort of how they cope.
I think that is really wise that you've noticed that. It is a really big defense mechanism or coping mechanism, like you said. I'm going to laugh through the pain. Other ones that I find are a lot of triangulation. Like, I'm feeling this conflict with my partner or with this person I just started dating, but I'm not going to talk to them about it. I'm going to bitch about it, for lack of a better word, with my girlfriends over wine. And it's like, well, that's not really going to help the situation. I find there's defense patterns in our body language, like I said, tightening our shoulders, or sometimes a woman may feel like she's in her feminine energy because she's wearing lipstick or heels or something, but her actual energy signature may be very rigid or very symmetrical, whereas feminine energy is more like asymmetrical and both open, but then also closed, and like it's movement and fluid, and versus kind of walking into a room like.
Yeah, it was because it looks flowing the way you're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, keep going, but I was just because you're right. I could tell the difference and it's not so much a diagram thing as much as I could tell you're just going from a different feel inside, and it shows up just in how you're moving there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So rigidness in the body could be a coping mechanism, or having to do the best at everything, like you've talked about earlier in this episode, or the laughing, laughing when it's something painful, or also, oh, that's okay, hey, like I can't make it tonight. Can we reschedule? Oh, that's okay. Inside, you're like, oh no, he canceled. Like, what's going on? So pretending everything is okay when it's not. Another coping mechanism, which is kind of sneaky, is being someone's therapist or kind of always holding space.
Oh, yeah.
So if the person you're getting to know is like, oh, whatever, I lost my job, or my sister's upset at me, or they have a bunch of stories and are going through a hard time, maybe they really are, or maybe they're just in kind of a more victim mode. Getting too caught up by that, like, oh, I'm so sorry, and trying to be too empathetic can be a way to hold space for others so you don't have to look at your own stuff. Like if you're with someone who always has a lot going on, that's hard, and you get to be their cheerleader or their therapist or their mother, then you kind of get a free pass to not have to look at your stuff. But that's not super sustainable, because then you may feel taken advantage of, or this person may not match you in the way that you want, just with their life force energy and what they're up to in the world.
Yeah, I hear all that and doing, especially that last one, doing all the giving and giving. At some point, that's going to run out, and I'm assuming lead to a lot of resentment.
Yes. And resentment, as you probably know, is like so toxic for a
It's so
relationship.
toxic.
Yeah.
So toxic. I don't think much scares me more than resentment because I find it's people. If I feel a lot of resentment, I can justify almost anything. I mean, I think most affairs,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of resentment there, and they don't always say it's right, but this is why I did it. I'm like, well, I understand, these things happen, but it just kind of glosses over and builds time and time again. And that's one of the things I'll tell women. I said, the promise I'm going to ask you to make is you'll never resent your husband when you get married. Now, that means you don't let stuff build. That doesn't mean, like what you said, swallow and pretend. That's the road. But that requires vulnerability too. And I hadn't thought so much about the body, but I love that because I like the emotional part. I teach that a lot, but about paying attention is that there's other ways for our brain to get our attention, willing to listen. And the tightness and stuff, and you're right, I've noticed that also. If I'm working on something, realizing, oh yeah, this is really tight. I didn't realize how overly focused I was on this. And I like that demonstration. If you're on the podcast, go watch on YouTube. You'll see how she did that, how you moved. And, again, it's not so much a move like this as much as that just looked more fun and playful. It just looked more when you said feminine.
Yes. And I actually want to expand on that, because I think we can think of resentments as painful and heavy, but you can also use your processing of resentments with your with your partner in a playful way. Like, sounds maybe a bit extreme, but after our daughter was born, she was maybe like a year and a half, and I was feeling overwhelmed just with household duties and parenting and running my own business and all of that. And I had wanted my partner to do more dishes. And I had asked him before, and not much had changed, not because he's a bad guy, but just because that's not really the highest thing on his priority list. And we were going out for brunch, but before we did, I'm like, I sat down in front of the dishwasher and I was like, and I like did a little tiny tantrum just for 10 seconds. And I pointed at it and I was like, ugh. And he's like, you want me to do more dishes? And I was like, and I didn't even say anything. It was just my body.
Oh,
And
that's
that
funny.
changed because he had a visceral sense versus
Yes.
me nagging,
Yes.
what I didn't think I was nagging him, but to him, he might have felt like I was nagging him all the times before. He thought, well, I'm not enough. I'm not doing enough versus, oh, wow, she's really sad about this. It's taking a toll on her.
It is amazing. I still think that's funny, but that's amazing the difference. I tell women how much, if we don't feel it as men, we don't hear it.
Yes.
And I mean, it's one thing if you just stomped up and down and screamed and stuff. I like the playful, but it was, but because as a man, I can see that. I mean, just you doing that right there versus if it's a task, you're right. I'm going to put it in a priority wise and I'll, whatever order from me, I'll get to it eventually if it's important over here because they all feel the same.
Yes.
But if she's unhappy or she's sad about something, that has a way of bumping to the top, whether I want it to or not.
Hmm.
I mean, it's almost like something I can't help when there's that connection with her emotionally.
Yes. And I just want to give another example of that because I think it's helpful sometimes as a listener to have concrete examples, like you've been sharing in this episode. I encourage my clients to do something that's very vulnerable, which is when you want to spend more time with your partner, tell him or the person you're dating, let him know that you miss him. Instead of like, why aren't we hanging out more? And I
Mm,
haven't seen you in a week and I haven't heard from you. Like, I woke up this morning and I really missed you. Like
mm.
that evokes a different feeling
It
than like,
does.
where have you been? You
Yes,
know?
it does. It really does.
Hmm.
And I hear how also it keeps the focus on you,
Yes.
which is a lot easier for us men to hear.
Hmm.
Um, and that also, gosh, there's a lot with that. That was very clever. Now then it feels like it's a problem I have to fix,
Hmm.
and we like fixing problems.
Yes.
That's a oh, that's good. Well, I have if we come to close. I would like to people to find out a little bit more about you. So a lot of great stuff here, and love how you integrated all of those. Where can someone, now that they watch this or listen to it, where can they find out more about you? How can they see you other places? Where would you like to invite them to come to?
They can check out my website, which is violetlange.com. It hasn't been updated a lot in a while. So if you're wanting more kind of like tips, tricks, feedback, if you go to YouTube and search Elements of Love, it's a web series that I did where I'm giving a lot of these sort of tools and practices. And I'm pretty hands on with my clients. So you can also just email me. If you're a listener and you're like, I'm curious about that thing you mentioned, email me and I will respond. My email is violet@violetlange.com. And yeah, my desire is just that everyone is in a happy, healthy relationship and feels deeply connected to themselves, including their body and their emotions and their vision. You know, we didn't talk about the head much, but I do think it's important to have a mental element, but we want to not focus that so much on the judgment. We want to focus that more on like the vision of what do we want to create with our partner.
Mhm. Hmm, that sounds like a good follow up. Now we will, of course, we'll have the links below, and so if you're on podcast, look below. YouTube, look below in there, and for whatever reason, if you can't find them, just let us know, and we can put you in touch with her. We'll have her contact information. Well, thanks so much for joining us. And I've enjoyed having you and getting to meet you and hear about this. Great stuff.
Okay.
And hopefully you can come back again sometime.
Thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate you taking the time to dive deeper and to bring this to the world, to have this service that helps people.
Okay. All right. So that's our episode, Relationship Headquarters. Look forward to talking to you next time.